In the journal Climatic Change, there is a new report out, and it's by Robert Bruhl, among others. He's the study's author, though, and he traces the people that are fighting against the idea of climate change. So these are the people who say that climate change does not exist and that it is not man-made. And he did something really interesting. He traced back who it is that says that and where the money comes from. That's really important. So number one, let me tell you about the groups. There's 91 think tanks, advocacy groups, and industry associations that give out reports, propaganda, etc., about climate change that are against the consensus on the scientific conclusions on climate change. And there's over 140 different foundations. Now, these are things that appear to be like think tanks, are perfectly reputable. Well, a bunch of really smart people got together and they thought, and they made a whole tank out of it. And so they must be honest and have an opinion that you should take into account. As you're about to find out here, they're totally funded by the groups that have a financial interest in making sure that you don't believe in climate change. So those 140 different foundations are shell groups. They're set up by, ironically, companies like Shell to make sure that you believe something that's going to help their bottom line, and that isn't true. In fact, 78% of these groups are set up as charitable organizations, and on top of that, to rub some salt in our wounds, they often get considerable tax breaks because they're seen as charities. Charities to ExxonMobil and the Koch brothers, that's about it, but certainly not to the rest of us. So let me tell you about some of the foundations so that if you see these groups, you know what they're up to. A lot of them are funded by Searle Freedom Trust, John William Pope Foundation, the Howard Charitable Foundation, and the Sarah Scaife Foundation. Now that's not all, but that's a sampling of the groups. So to give you a sense that when you see those groups, those people aren't the ones that are like, oh, just looking out for the needy or making sure that we can all get along on the planet. No, they're front groups made to created specifically so that the people who give them money can make even more money by injecting all this propaganda into the public debate. So how do they do it? They use that money to do lobbying, political contributions, and they do huge media campaigns. Two of the biggest groups that do it are the American Enterprise Institute. They get 16% of the money funneled in this direction. And the Heritage Foundation, and you'll hear about both of these groups often, they get 14% of the money funneled to these groups. And they're the ones that the Republicans quote all the time. Wow, there's an important report out from the Heritage Foundation. The Heritage Foundation says we should keep guzzling all the gas in the world. Don't worry about all that carbon dioxide in the air. I mean, what would scientists, 97% of the world's scientists know? And that's what we're up against. It's 97% of the world's scientists against a tremendous amount of money spent on propaganda. How much? Well, between 2003 and 2010, those are the years that they track, on average, these groups received $900 million a year. That is a combined over $7 billion in that 8-year time period they spent to deceive us. Now, to be fair, it was not all against climate change. There's money that those groups get that they use on other forms of propaganda. And look, from time to time, will you find among those 140 different groups some that are earnest libertarians and they have a libertarian ideology, or maybe even a few that have legitimate conservative ideology. That's really hard to find because unfortunately the conservative movement in this country, which is a perfectly legitimate movement, has been co-opted by multinational corporations and geared in the direction of anything that is positive for corporations and not necessarily for conservative Americans. But from time to time, you'll find a few honest groups that actually do a real report, and those are worth checking out. But unfortunately, the overwhelming majority are paid by those same groups who profit off of it, and that's the whole point of them. They're set out to deceive you. And so that Republicans could have a fig leaf when they come in, and oftentimes Democrats do, come in and say, well, look, man, it's not my idea. The American Enterprise Institute spent a lot of money doing this report. And they inundate the media with it as well. So since 2003, by the way, funding has only increased. It's gone up 13% in that time period. So they see that this propaganda works, so they funnel more and more money into it. Do you know that in 2010 alone, that's the last year studied there, they spent $1.2 billion on this. That's what we're up against. So a lot of people outside of the country don't understand, why do Americans have this knuckle-headed notion that climate change doesn't exist when every scientist is saying it? It's like saying all the scientists agree that if you jump off a building, you will fall down because there's this thing called the theory of gravity, right? But the Americans, they don't believe it. Why? Because $1.2 billion have been put into our system to make sure that we don't believe it, that we're confused by it. So yes, scientists might agree to climate change almost as much as they believe in gravity, but not here in America. The citizens are totally confused. This is not an accident. This is not two equal sides of a debate having a legitimate argument about policy issues in the open, free market of ideas. This is a rigged debate. A lot of money has been poured in to make sure that that oil keeps flowing. Because if they spend $1.2 billion, trust me that they're making a hell of a lot more than that. And when we've shown you story after story, all you have to do is go look at the bottom line of all those companies that work in the oil industry, which are literally the most profitable companies in the world. They're not spending that $1 billion for their health, and certainly not for the planet's health. For the exact opposite. They're spending it so they can make more money. Turns out doing propaganda and buying politicians through lobbyists and through campaign donations in America is a very profitable business. And I know, again, if you don't live here, it seems weird, but here in America, you're allowed to buy our politicians. It's legalized bribery. You just give them a campaign check. Say, here, you spend this and you can get reelected. Now do what I tell you. That's perfectly legal. I know it seems insane, right? But and Americans have gotten so used to it. Our own reporters come in here and go, oh, well, who's done the best job of getting the most legal bribes? Well, look at that. Mitt Romney's done a terrific job. On the Republican side of the primaries, he's raised the most amount of money by promising to do whatever the hell his donors tell him to do. It's an amazing system. Now, you know me. I think that we can change it. Wolf-pack.com is a site that we've set up. Wolfpack is the pack that we've set up to fight back against this so that we get the money out of politics and you can't do anything about what they spend in the media. That is what it is. But you can stop them from directly buying our politicians in the form of donations as they're doing it in the form of lobbying. That's something that American people can get together and work on, no matter what ideology you're from. So now let me give you a sense of how they've become even more devious now. In the old days, it was just up through 2007, ExxonMobil would simply write a check to one of these groups and say, here, go, deny climate change, okay? And they'd hire a bunch of so-called scientists and authors to do these reports, etc. And they realized, well, that's a little inconvenient. That's so out in the open. So now they switched to a dark money tactic. The report explains, these two philanthropic organizations, referring to Donors Trust and Donors Capital Fund, which is the new groups that they have set up to hide the money, these organizations form a black box that conceals the identity of contributors to various CCCM organizations. So these guys that are denying climate change, they don't give directly anymore. They give them to this dark box called Donors Trust and Donors Capital Fund, and they funnel the money. And then when American Enterprise Institute is asked about it, they're like, what do you mean? I got it from Donors Trust. Well, who's Donors Trust? I don't know. Could it be ExxonMobil? Maybe. But you can't find out. Man, they have corrupted the system so thoroughly. This is called dark money, by the way. And it's something else that Americans have gotten totally used to. Oh, well, obviously they got the dark money. And we're just totally fine with it. Well, obviously they took that and they tricked them, the whole American people, and bought all their politicians. Washington reporters don't even blink an eye. They find this perfectly normal. I know, like, if you're watching this, if you're in America or abroad, you find it insane. But when you report about this, the Washington reporters are like, what are you getting all worked up for? That's business as usual. Partly because they've been greased as well. Now, finally, the environmental sociologist Robert Bruhl, who's worked on this, says money amplifies certain voices above others, and in effect, gives them a megaphone in the public square. I love that quote. That's exactly right. That nails it right there. So the Republicans will often say, what? It's freedom of speech. I mean, money is speech. I get to spend a lot. No. You got a freedom of speech, but you don't have $1.2 billion to back it up. So you're on a street corner. They buy the world's largest megaphone with that $1.2 billion and drown out not just your voice, but almost all of our voices. That's how this game is played. I think there is a way to change that game, and it's done through Wolfpack. If you can in some way help, whether it's volunteer, donate, become a member, whatever it is, I think we can get these guys. I know it's not an easy fight, but civil rights wasn't an easy fight. Women's right to vote wasn't an easy fight. I'm pretty sure the Civil War was not an easy fight, but some fights are worth fighting, and this is certainly among them. wolf-pack.com, because this is on the issue of climate change. But this wholesale buying of our politicians is true in almost every issue. If you don't fix that core problem, well, you shouldn't be surprised when Americans wake up and go, what? I don't know. I thought climate change, I thought that was a 50-50 proposition. I don't know. Since I can't decide if it's true or not, let's not do anything about it. That's what's happening in America and literally killing our planet.